And I wanted to share kind of the early story of how our brand, House of Jane and Jane's Brew, was conceived. It started about 37 years ago when it was one day, out of the blue, that my dad led me to the backyard and showed me 7 little plants in the ground. Seriously. So I looked at him, and all he had was this big mischievous grin on his face. But I didn't know it at the time, but really, that was the day that changed my life. I was 20. It was 1980, and it was almost kind of cool to smoke pot in my town. It seems like everybody smoked pot. It was like no big deal. I had just come home from college, and I needed something to do for the summer, but I didn't know what it was going to be until then. See, my dad knew I had a head for making money, and he also knew I smoked pot. But it's funny. This is a story that just brings back so many memories to me. He was a local vet, and I knew that he had an incinerator in his backyard, and he told me this. I kept saying, I know this is marijuana, but how did it get there? Why is it there? And he told me that the police would come with their confiscated pot from raids and busts, and they would take it to his incinerator in his backyard of his animal hospital, and they'd burn it. Well, that seemed reasonable enough to me, but I never quite understood the rest of the story. He told me that somehow these seeds that were in part of the plant, back then the weed wasn't very good, and they actually germinated, or they popped like popcorn, and they popped out of the incinerator, and they landed in this moist soil, and they sprouted. So he thought it would be very fun. This is the story he told me. I'll never know if it was really true. But I will tell you that all I needed was that. It was like the inception point for me. Although I had never, ever showed any interest in gardening before at all, I immediately went and bought a copy of High Times, and I ordered, there weren't very many books on marijuana growing at the time, and I bought a book on marijuana growing. And by the end of the summer, I can proudly say that even though compared to Days Weed, there was no comparison, but I learned how to grow, I learned how to harvest, and I found my passion. So I took all of my load of weed and everything back to my school, and for the next 2 years, I grew, and I sold pot on the beach. And, and honestly, that's how I got my start in cannabis. But I graduated, and I went to work in high tech in Silicon Valley at Intel Corporation. I started my own company, got married, had 2 amazing children, a boy and a girl, and I really thought my pot days were behind me. Plus, my husband was a very conservative dentist, and I just really kept my weed history to myself. It wasn't until a lot later that my kids were in their teens, and they approached me one day, kind of really very seriously, and my son let his older sister do the talking, and they said, "Mom, we smoke pot and we like it." So at first, what is a parent to say? I went back into my parent role, and then I just honestly said, well, you know what? I smoke pot too, and I really like it. So that very same weekend, we decided that, as the 3 of us, that we were going to sit my husband, their father, down and come out to him. And we actually did that. That's another story. We'll leave it there. But later that year, it was in summer, we took our family to Europe for the summer, and on the way, we stopped in Amsterdam, and we, of course, went to the coffee shops, infamous coffee shops, where they serve cannabis, not coffee. So we're sitting there, puffing away, having a great time, and I'm kind of hacking, because I don't like the harsh brickweed they still have over there. And I'm wondering, honestly, why in the world don't they have cannabis coffee. It made all the sense to me in the world. So we went on, finished our vacation. I put that in the back of my brain, but it kept lingering. By the time I got home at the end of summer, my entrepreneurial mind just kept going. I couldn't stop. Now, truth is, I knew nothing about the industry. I didn't know one person other than my kids' friends who sold me weed. So I really didn't know where to start. But do you know when you're onto something and you don't know how you're going to get there or how you're going to do it, but you know one way or another it's going to happen? That's exactly what happened to me. So my son, who was also very entrepreneurially minded, and I decided we were just going to jump in, see where it landed. So I sought out a couple of experts. I read a lot. And finally, after, I'd say, months of experimenting like a mad scientist in my kitchen on myself and anybody else who would allow me to, we came up with a pretty basic infused cannabis coffee and tea. I was really proud of what we'd accomplished. But the truth was, we were so far from being able to go to market. We didn't have the resources, the money, the expertise, and I really did need more business acumen. So because we knew nobody and knew nothing, we decided to go to a conference in Denver, and that was when things started to take a turn for me, because serendipity brought me to that man back there, Ben Shepherd. And I could say the rest is history, but in truth, it was the beginning of one of the most outrageously crazy journeys I've ever been on. And we've had our ups and downs, but what I will tell you is that with his funds, we were able to hire real food scientists, bring in the real expertise we needed, and develop great tasting products. We didn't mess around with it. We did it right the first time. And in addition to that, we really focused on our branding. And you can see how important it is to us. And all along, there's just been this passion in both of us, which I will say is probably one of the most important things when you're talking about branding. You have to really believe in your product. It has to take on its own story, its own energy. And that's what House of Jane and Jane's Brew has done. We created a story, a buzzworthy movement. Everything we did was bringing forth the brand. We've had parties in Washington, D.C., the first of its kind consumer party ever. We've had parties in Denver. We brought out the brand. And the brand was conceived, and our vision is really, really clear. We wanted to be a brand that had the best practices. We wanted something where California is still a self-policing state, believe it or not, when it comes to regulations on cannabis. Soon to change, but it's been like that since 1996 when there were finally laws on the books for medical marijuana. But in any case, we wanted to have one of best practices in our manufacturing, in our consistency, in our dosing. That was foremost for us. And we wanted it to be a responsible brand. We didn't want it to be marketed to the barely legal or the stoner mentality. We wanted a brand that was targeted towards people like you and me. And it was for the mainstream. A brand that was a lifestyle brand, something that people could consume in a social situation, having fun, keeping it light, and still making it discreet. It's a little bit different than smoking a joint when you're out to dinner. It just doesn't happen that way. So we also formed the company House of Jane about then. It all came together, and we launched in January of 2015. And I think Ben pretty much covers it from there, but I will just say that we've had amazing success, but there have also been some major bumps. And just a few things to remember when you begin your company is to seek out the best expertise you can and think things through considerably. As Ben said earlier, we launched with way too many SKUs. It was almost humorous now when we think about it. We wanted to appeal to everybody's dose levels. But we also had the problem of lack of automation. We still didn't have the capital equipment that we needed to actually get our labor costs down. And because we wanted to be the responsible brand, we wanted to make a footprint. So we scoured California and got into almost every club initially. But then we didn't have the marketing support to back it up. These were all little things that we learned along the way. But I have to say that now, after 2 years, we have come a long way. We're on the verge of finding quality contract manufacturers. We have a great sales and distribution team in place for all of California. We've rolled out now to 3 other states besides California, but we still have a long way to go. Anyway, thank you very much.